Afternoon, everyone. So, ETC is upon us. I think I fly out in 2 weeks. And then, obviously, a couple days after that, we will all be playing. So now it's really, we're just in the prep phase where I had talked about in one of my previous videos, the grids I made that I kind of gave out to everybody to use. Um, and so we know our first round matchup. We know it's Germany, which is funny in and of itself just because Thomas and I speak so much to each other. I mean, we checked each other's list before we submitted them to make sure there was no errors. So it's not like we knew each other's list before we even submitted. And so getting them first round was kind of funny. And obviously, they're one of the probably top five favorites to win it all. So, having to go through them first is always going to be difficult. That we probably have the second premier match. Obviously, the Spain Poland match is definitely two top teams um, going against each other. That's going to be big. Some of the other top teams, I don't think any of them got necessarily hard opponents that I know of. What was it? It was Wales and Swiss, so Swiss is going to win. It was Italy and New Zealand, so I expect Italy to crush them. I mean, who knows? But I do expect both those. I mean, Wales, I think, is pretty going to get capped, but New Zealand at least has more of a fight in them, I think, than I don't remember who France got, but I think they know them. I think they should be good. And then you have obviously Poland and Spain, and then us and Germany. I wouldn't consider us technically like up there in that tier, but Germany playing us is probably a little bit harder than playing some of those other rounds. And so it's interesting, prepping for it. Is it good that you have so much prep time for such a good team? Probably. But they also get to prep for you. And then in going through all this process and then obviously prepping for the other teams and doing map analysis to, which side is best, trying to, because all the scenarios were released. So essentially, we know what the 6 rounds are going to be. And in fact, I had them up on the screen at some point. And so there are some interesting pairings. I think frontline hold the center is kind of the most basic, boring. Boring is not a good word. It's just a basic one, easy deployment with an easy scenario. And then you get into some interesting ones like counter throw secure. Probably not the most exciting secure target, though. The fact that you get to push people back off of markers is kind of interesting. Um, breakthrough, refuse flank. That one's probably interesting in the fact that because it's less distance between the deployment zones, and because of just how it works, usually breakthrough can sometimes be very lopsided, where people just kind of do a clock thing where somebody deploys here, somebody deploys here, and you just kind of go up with your your scoring. And maybe in refuse flank, the way it kind of cuts the board and how it's like you don't have a lot of room down here, you don't have a lot of room up here. Maybe it'll have more action and breakthrough will be both harder and easier at the same time. It probably does help those armies who don't have the fastest scoring in the world, but it can still like kind of hold their ground. What's the next one? Marching column spoils. This one is probably the most interesting one. We actually played this in a scrim, and it's just very. There's a lot of dynamics to it where, spoils is already one of the most interesting scenarios. I think just because of do you go for three of them? Do you probably go for two and defend one, or like kind of threaten all of them? And I think it really, I think margin column spoils gives you the most room for somebody to mess up in deployment, um, whether picking the wrong side or just how they go about it. You also some of these armies we've seen don't have a lot of drops, and so I think marching columns hurts them obviously because they got to put down important drops early, but because it's spoils, it's even almost more impactful. Because not only do you have to put down your important drops early, but the opponent kind of knows where you are and kind of can react to like potentially going after a spoils marker that you can't defend. Um, I think that round will be one of the more interesting ones. In Circle, King of the Hill is also another great pairing because it's actually other than what's it called? Other than diagonal deployment, refuse flank, it's the most, or I guess Dawn Assault technically has it, but it's the most interesting of the three that have dynamic deployment zones where somebody gets to choose like kind of the shape of it because it starts, there's some maps where one side, if you pick the right, big flanks or big center, there are no terrain pieces to pick. So as the person who, it's almost better to pick sides in some of those matches, just because of that. And then, obviously that's a nice one to plan out which terrain pieces you're going to pick, how you're going to defend it. And then you kind of end the tournament shittily with Dawn Assault, Capture the Flags. Uh, Probably the most boring of the six. And the fact that it comes in the last round will be interesting because it kind of gives the advantage to the team who's up going into the last round. Because, so let's just make an assumption that some team needs to get 90 to 70 to win etc against their opponents, and let's just assume that nobody on the bottom tables can catch them with like 100, right? Let's just make an assumption. Well, as the team who needs only 70, I mean, Capture the Flag's Dawn Assault, I mean, you can put your scoring like in this corner when they can't even deploy in front of you, and you can basically, you can corner up here while they have to deploy here, and like it's just a harder press in for some of these armies. And so it kind of is a defensive one. It probably would have been more interesting if that one wasn't the last scenario, but it is what it is. I mean, I'm not saying there won't be games or won't be fighting, because what's interesting is probably from the top table perspective, it favors the team in the lead. But all the other tables, like, it's probably one of the better ones because a lot of people just fucking go for it because they want to, if you're on table 3 or 4, you need to score 100 or some big win um, to probably get like podium. So maybe teams just fight for it anyway. So it is what it is. So that's interesting that the six are out again. We got Germany. We're doing what we can to plan. And I guess what I kind of just realized, in this whole ETC process, probably from going a year back when I became captain to now, is, I had all these big dreams for ways to improve, things you can do to, get the team better, blah 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 blah, matrix analysis, puzzles, whatever you want to call it. And at the end of the day, you pretty much just, good players are going to be good, and yes, prep is very important, but playing the game and understanding how the game is, and you just, like, in chess, when you study openings, right? Like, openings theory can go on for a good bit of back and forth, and like the chess pieces are always the same. And so you can do a lot of really, really good prep, and then when you get out of prep after however many moves, you rely on your skill. Well, in ninth age, yeah, you can do some prep and you can practice deployments and shit. But at some point, like, the opponent can just do something, right? Or deploy differently, or you get the map, and what side do you get? You can play, like, even versus Germany, for example. Like, I have 8 potential opponents in there, in all of them. I know what the scenario is, at least, in the deployment, but I don't know which map I'm going to be on. I don't know if I'm going to get to start or not. So there's a lot of variables that you're kind of just like, all right, well, kind of, you just go to the board and play your game. Like, I think dice rolls is also another big thing, and I don't want to call it luck as been getting lucky or unlucky, but the ebb and flow of a game is way different. Does a spell go off early and maybe put you on the back foot? Do you make a long charge or miss an easy charge? The dynamic of the game changes very quickly, and all of a sudden you're in this chaos of the game, and there is no prep that really prepares you for it other than just experience and seeing different situations. And this is kind of why I don't know how to prep for this in the case. So one thing obviously I've talked about is a lot of rules videos with its reforming, charging, blah blah blah. You've heard me discuss rules and how they work for a long time since I've been a TO of the online events. And I try to instill in my team this sense of knowing the rules and being able to take advantage of situations. But I was thinking about the other day, it's kind of like applied learning versus just reading a textbook, right? If I was going to read a textbook on organic chemistry, I would still be shit at it just because I read it. Like, it doesn't make me that much better, but you have to go and apply it to your games. And the problem is, some of these situations are so niche, or you just don't think about them, that how do you get that experience applying them? In fact, I think one of the best ways to get it is to watch a game, and I've talked about this in a video, watch a game and just think about those things, because you don't have to think about everything else. You can think about, like, oh, is there a combat reform here that can screw my opponent or screw one of the people playing? Or is there a flee or a redirect or a combo charge where, depending on how you maximize things, it can really hurt people. And so it's actually very difficult to to put those things front of mind, even if you know the rules, because you don't actively think about them a lot. So you have to actively think about these rules. You have to know them, think about them, and apply them. And usually, what happens is this is why playing your army a lot is very important, because if you play your list enough, even if it's not perfect, it's your list. You get accustomed to how it plays, and you can start thinking about those other things. You can start knowing what's important, what's not important. And you got to worry about panicking my elders if they're near each other. I want to make sure I'm in range for the attribute of guiding light or blah blah blah. And when you just kind of naturally do those things, um, uh, then it becomes easier to focus on the more detailed stuff. Dogs and leadership. If you're worried about your leadership ranges all the time with armies, um, or you don't, you're not good with its movement, then you don't have time to think about combat reforms. So that's another thing where experience really plays a big part. But now, one question that kind of came up to me when I was doing all this prep, and I was like, okay, it matters, but yet it doesn't matter at the same time. I think it feels like it matters a lot more because you spend so much time doing it and it's all you can do in the downtime. But in the end, good players are going to be good players. Games are going to be, dice are going to be rolled, and things are going to change, and it just is what it is. And so the next layer I was thinking about was this whole online versus in person. I said that I probably will do like a day of ESC or something just to get myself back to playing in person because I've played so much online. And it kind of got to the question in my mind of, and I've talked to a couple guys about this, which is online more beneficial for the person playing, or sorry, that was the dumb question. Is it more beneficial for the better player or the worst player, right? And so I will talk about my theory about that a little bit. If you are the worst player or the better player, you have all these tools to use, right? You can look at all the ranges, you can look at the wheel patterns, you can easily line up overruns and see all this other stuff, and you can check everything behind the site super quick. And so can the worst person, but you would assume that somebody who's better at the game will more utilize these tools. And I think that's true. I think online the good person will get more out of the tools than the bad person. But I think what I've determined is that I think on the board, over the board, whatever, on the table, on the real table, the gap is wider for the good player because look at, I was just talking about how like you have to know enough about your army and the rules to kind of be able to think about everything. And UB or Warhol makes it super easy to like think about wheels, think about maximizing. You can click on all these ranges while the opponent is moving without giving away anything. So you can do all this stuff while the opponent's moving without really giving anything away, and you can check all these things. And I think as the lesser player, you kind of get reminded about overruns. You're like, oh, you put this here and or this here, and you think, oh, look, my overrun is going to be a 10, or if I make sure my guy is, I don't know, 2 inches from the left, it means no cav base or something, no chariot base can overrun into him, so shit like that. Um, and so I actually think that the tools are easier for the bad player. I'll say it this way: when you get to the board, everything UB does, you can basically check it in on the table. Like there's nothing that stops you from measuring all these things and just keeping things in mind when you're playing on the table. But I think that the better players are more likely to actively think about them and do them during the game than a lesser player where when the tools are removed and they all of a sudden don't have all these cool ways to check things, they might forget about, while they're trying to fiddle with their unit, they might try to forget about an overrun or a maximize or something like that. So I'm very curious to play in person again, just because it's a different feel. Like it's a different game. Obviously, it's a little sloppier because of people's movement, but I actually do think people are worse on the table. The gap is bigger on the table than online. Um, I'm just curious to see how it goes. I mean, we're all playing the same game. A lot of the players at ETC are very solid. I'm probably going with a mindset of people are better than they maybe are. I know there's a lot of solid players going. Um, Also, I think you see a lot of people grinding games online and stuff, and that's great. I love to see it. Even as a captain, I don't grind as much as they do. I'll blame the kid, but some of them have kids too. Um, but it's kind of going back to the chess example. You have people that play thousands of hours of chess and they only get to a certain level and they really never move from there. And at some point, like playing a lot of games is still only so you're only going to go up so far and it depends on how you learn from it. So I don't know. I feel like I'm excited for ETC. I'm ready. My nerves are a little up there. I'm excited to get the scrims in and practice in person and see everybody, of course. And the last thing I probably I talked about with some good players was, do you want to, and I've talked about this in another video, where I think that some good players score a lot of points because they get fed bad players. Like it's just like, all right, Cal is really good, let's just give him a bad player, or he gets good matchups from his captain, and then fuck it, he'll score his 20 and we'll try to beat the rest of them. And so very rarely do you see some of these quote unquote top people face other top people. I mean, it happens, and I think Garza from um, Spain had like a super impressive like string of people he played at ETC and still scored 60. And so it kind of came, especially when thinking about Germany, for example, or just any good team. We'll do Poland, for example. You kind of sit there, and Poland has a lot of good players, but you kind of sit there and say, as a captain, like, do you just feed Furion someone bad, or do you just try to step up and beat him yourself? If you think you're good enough to take him, like there's something to that. I mean, from a team perspective, and I'm not going to hear get in like super pairing theory, but if you give him a free 20 and you're trying to depend on yourself getting a 20, then just evens it out. But if you pair against him and beat him, then it's better for you. Obviously, if you go down to him big, then you're trading one of your best players for their best. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh shit. But I mean, there's something to that, and I think we don't know where ETC is going to be next year. As far as like, I don't know if I'm going to go. Who knows, right? And there are some players out there I talk to who just want to experience good players. Like if I walked away and scored 110 points, but I played like the bottom player from each team, and we like got capped 2 rounds, and so I was on the bottom tables. Does that really matter? Like, but what if you scored like 70 or 80 points and you played Furion and Thomas and Cal and maybe a couple other good players or solid players? Like that's something to not only feel good about, but I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Like I've heard how good I played Furion and Thomas before, obviously, but I've never played Cal. I've barely seen him play. I would love to play him. I'm not like sitting here like worshiping him, thinking, "Oh, I'm going to lose the game," but I'd love to see what makes him so good. Is he so good? I mean, if online has taught me anything, it's that the good players are obviously good, but they're not as like. There's nothing crazy. Like we're all playing the same game. I know the rules better than most of them, so they're not doing anything rules wise that's super crazy. Now they're using the rules in good ways, and I've been able to learn from that and kind of take it as I can. But there's nothing else. Like they just make good decisions, some good combat reforms, some good double charges. Doesn't Probably they make less mistakes, like with overruns and combo charges and stuff like that. But I don't know. I just want to experience these good players. Like there's a part of me that's like the glory in taking down the best players, or at least trying to, has something to it. So I'm kind of excited for me to see in that perspective. I think I was more nervous about like I just want to get a lot of points, and now I'm kind of in the I want to do what's best for the team. I think that's always the first priority, whether it's taking the bad players and trying to crush them, or taking the top players and trying to beat them. But at some point, like I'm not scared anymore to like play good people and maybe lose a game. Like it is what it is, man. You gotta do what you gotta do. We can't even come here to be scared and play the worst players out there. Like, what's the point of that? I mean, I enjoy a good game versus a good player, and if you lose, you lose. But I don't know. These are kind of just ramblings before ETC. So, like I said, this is probably my last video before ETC because it's in 2 weeks. I gotta get ready. These are just kind of some random thoughts I have. So, thanks for listening.